If you were planning the most ambitious heist in history, Madrid's Royal Mint would probably be the last place you'd consider. Heavily fortified, crawling with security, and right in the heart of Spain's capital, it seemed impossible to breach. But inside that very building, a mysterious man known only as the Professor was about to orchestrate something that wasn't just a robbery. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, political manipulation, and human drama that would captivate an entire nation. This is the story of how 8 strangers, each carrying their own scars and secrets, came together under the guidance of a brilliant criminal mastermind to pull off what appeared to be a heist, but was actually something far more sophisticated. It's a tale of desperation, love, betrayal, and the thin line between genius and madness. But to understand how it all unfolded, we need to go back much further than that fateful day when red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks became symbols of rebellion across the world. Our story begins not with the heist itself, but decades earlier with a young boy whose father was killed during a botched robbery at a bank in Spain. This wasn't just any tragedy, it was a moment that would shape the course of history for everyone involved. That boy grew up to become Sergio Marquina, though the world would know him only as the Professor, a man so methodical, so precise, that he spent years planning every detail of what would become known as the heist of the century. The Professor wasn't motivated by money, despite what everyone would assume. Hidden beneath his calm exterior, behind those thick glasses and quiet demeanour, was a man driven by a very personal vendetta against the Spanish government and banking system. The same system that had failed his father, that had created the circumstances leading to his death, would now face the most elaborate revenge plot in criminal history. His plan was audacious in its scope. He would recruit a team of misfits and criminals, train them for months in an abandoned warehouse, and then execute a heist that would last exactly 5 days. But here's the twist that no one saw coming. Not the police, not the media, not even some members of his own team. They weren't really there to steal money. They were there to expose the government's corruption while simultaneously pulling off the largest money printing operation in history. The Professor understood something crucial about human psychology. People root for the underdog. They sympathise with Robin Hood, not the Sheriff of Nottingham. So he designed his heist to make his team look like modern-day freedom fighters battling against an oppressive system. Every move was calculated, every contingency planned. He even accounted for the possibility that team members might fall in love, betray each other, or break under pressure. What he didn't fully account for was how deeply he himself would become emotionally invested in the very plan he designed to be coldly logical. The Professor didn't choose his team randomly. Each member was selected for specific skills and psychological profiles that would serve his greater purpose. But more than that, he chose people who had been failed by the system, people with nothing left to lose, people who would fight fiercely when given something to believe in. There was Tokyo, a young woman whose real name was Silene Oliveira, though that name belonged to a life she could never return to. She'd been living as a fugitive after a robbery gone wrong, constantly running from both the police and dangerous criminals who wanted her dead. When the Professor found her, she was literally seconds away from committing suicide, standing on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, ready to end the pain of constant fear and isolation. The Professor didn't just recruit her, he saved her life, giving her a purpose when she had none. Tokyo was impulsive where the Professor was methodical, emotional where he was analytical. She represented pure instinct and survival, someone who had learned to fight because fighting was the only thing that kept her alive. Her reckless energy and fierce loyalty would become both an asset and a liability throughout the heist. She was the wild card that even the Professor couldn't fully predict or control. Berlin, whose real name was Andres de Fonollosa, was perhaps the most complex member of the team. Elegant, cultured, and utterly ruthless, he was dying of Helmer's myopathy, a rare degenerative disease that was slowly killing him. He saw the heist as his final masterpiece, his last chance to create something beautiful and terrible before death claimed him. What the team didn't know initially was that Berlin was actually the Professor's older brother, a secret that would complicate everything and add layers of family drama to an already complex operation. Berlin brought an aristocratic sensibility to the criminal enterprise. He quoted literature, discussed philosophy, and treated the heist like an elaborate performance piece. But beneath his cultured exterior was a man capable of breathtaking cruelty, someone who viewed other people as chess pieces to be be moved around for his own purposes. His relationship with the hostages would be marked by both unexpected kindness and chilling indifference to their suffering. Nairobi, real name Agatha Jimenez, was a counterfeiting expert who'd lost custody of her son due to her criminal activities. She brought technical expertise in producing fake currency and an emotional anchor for the team. Her maternal instincts would prove crucial during the most intense moments inside the mint. She had a gift for printing money that was almost artistic in its precision, but her real talent was for reading people and understanding what made them tick. Nairobi's motivation was deeply personal. She wanted enough money to disappear and start a new life where she could be reunited with her son. She brought a practical wisdom to the team and often served as a mediator when tensions arose. Her loss of her child had left her with a protective instinct that extended to her teammates, making her both a fierce ally and someone who would challenge decisions that put the team at unnecessary risk. Then there was Helsinki and Oslo, two cousins from the Balkans with military backgrounds who served as the muscle of the operation. Oslo was the gentler of the two, despite his intimidating appearance, a man who had seen too much violence in the wars that tore apart their homeland. He joined the heist not for money but for the brotherhood he'd lost when the fighting ended. Helsinki was fiercely protective of his cousin and later of the entire team. He had a simple moral code, loyalty above all else, and he would prove willing to sacrifice everything for the people he considered family. Both men carried the psychological scars of war, but they'd found in each other and eventually in the team a new kind of unit worth fighting for. Denver, whose real name was Daniel Ramos, was the son of Moscow, another team member, a young man with a troubled past. Denver's unpredictable nature and growing conscience would create some of the most dramatic moments inside the mint. He had a distinctive laugh that sounded almost maniacal. A nervous tic developed during a childhood marked by his father's criminal activities and frequent absences. Denver represented the next generation, someone young enough to change course, but old enough to understand the weight of his choices. His relationship with his father was complicated. Love mixed with disappointment, respect tempered by resentment. The heist would become as much about proving himself to his father as it was about the money. Moscow, Denver's father, whose real name was Agustin Ramos, was an experienced miner brought in for his expertise with tunnels and explosives. His paternal relationship with Denver and protective nature toward the hostages would reveal the humanity beneath the criminal exterior. Moscow had spent years working in dangerous conditions, developing both the technical skills and physical courage needed for the operation. But Moscow's real contribution was emotional stability. He'd seen enough of life to understand that violence should be a last resort, that treating people with dignity costs nothing and often pays unexpected dividends. His relationship with Denver was the heart of the heist's emotional core, a father trying to give his son opportunities he'd never had while protecting him from the worst consequences of their choices. Finally, there was Rio, the youngest member of the team, whose real name was Anibal Cortés, a brilliant hacker despite his youth. Rio's technical skills were essential for manipulating security systems and communications. At barely 21, he brought both the technological expertise of his generation and the emotional volatility of youth. Rio had grown up in the digital age, more comfortable with computers than people. His recruitment to the team gave him something he'd never had, a sense of belonging and purpose beyond the virtual world. But his youth also made him vulnerable to the psychological pressures of the operation in ways the professor couldn't fully predict. But the professor's most crucial recruitment wasn't for the team inside the mint. It was Raquel Murillo, though she didn't know she was being recruited. Raquel was the police negotiator assigned to communicate with the robbers, a recently divorced mother struggling with personal and professional challenges. She was brilliant at her job at dealing with the collapse of her marriage, concerns about her daughter, and the stress of being one of the few women in a male-dominated police force. The professor, using the alias Salva Martin, orchestrated their chance meeting outside her daughter's school and began the most elaborate seduction in criminal history. What made this particularly twisted was that Raquel was genuinely falling in love with the man she knew as Salva, never realizing he was the mastermind behind the very crime she was trying to solve. The professor was manipulating her emotions while simultaneously using their relationship to stay one step ahead of the police investigation. Every conversation they had gave him insight into the police strategy. Every intimate moment was also an intelligence-gathering operation, yet something unexpected happened. The professor's feelings for Raquel became genuine, creating an emotional complexity that threatened to derail his carefully laid plans. The professor had spent months preparing his team in an abandoned warehouse outside Madrid. This wasn't just criminal training, it was psychological preparation for what would be the most intense 5 days of their lives. He taught them to think like a unit, to anticipate each other's moves, to handle weapons, and most importantly, to stick to the plan no matter what chaos erupted around them. The warehouse became a world unto itself. The professor created detailed models of the Royal Mint, complete with floor plans, security systems, and escape routes. He made them memorize every detail until they could navigate the building blindfolded. But more than technical preparation, he was building loyalty and trust among people who had learned not to trust anyone. Each team member was given a code name based on a city: Tokyo, Berlin, Nairobi, Helsinki, Oslo, Denver, Moscow, and Rio. These weren't just aliases, they were new identities, a way of leaving their old lives behind and becoming part of something larger. The professor understood that people fight harder for a cause than for money, so he gave them a cause, striking back at a system that had failed them all. The training wasn't just about the heist itself. The professor prepared them for the psychological warfare that would follow. He taught them how to handle hostages with a mixture of firmness and humanity, how to present themselves to the media, and how to maintain morale during what would inevitably be a siege situation. He even prepared them for the possibility of death, though he was confident his plan would bring them all home safely. When the heist began on an ordinary Monday morning in September, it looked like a straightforward robbery. 8 people in red jumpsuits and Salvador Dalí masks stormed into the Royal Mint of Spain, taking dozens of hostages, including students on a school tour. The masks weren't chosen randomly. Salvador Dalí represented surrealism, the art of making the impossible seem real, which was exactly what the professor intended to do. Within minutes, the robbers had control of the building and its occupants, but within hours, it became clear this was unlike any crime Spain had ever seen. The robbers weren't behaving like typical criminals. They treated the hostages with unexpected courtesy, even kindness. They provided medical care, food, and comfort. More importantly, they began printing money, billions of euros, while engaging in an elaborate psychological battle with the police through their communications with negotiator Raquel. The choice of the Royal Mint wasn't accidental. The professor had selected it not because of the money stored there, but because it was one of only 2 places in Spain authorized to print euros. His plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of stealing existing money, they would create new money. Technically, they wouldn't be stealing anything that existed before they arrived. Outside the mint, a massive police operation unfolded under the command of Colonel Prieto, a man whose methods were as ruthless as they were effective. Prieto represented everything the professor despised about the Spanish establishment: corruption masked as patriotism, violence disguised as justice. He was willing to use any means necessary to end the crisis, regardless of the cost to hostages or the rule of law. Prieto's approach was traditional law enforcement: surround the building, cut off communications, apply pressure until the criminals surrender or are forced into a position where they can be eliminated. But the professor had anticipated this strategy and designed his operation to turn each standard police tactic against them. When the police cut external communications, the robbers revealed they had their own communication systems. When authorities tried to storm the building, they discovered the robbers had superior knowledge of the layout and defensive positions. Every move the police made seemed to have been predicted and counted before it was even attempted. As the days progressed, the lines between hostage and captor began to blur in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Some hostages started sympathizing with their captors, a psychological phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome. But this wasn't simple psychology. The robbers were genuinely treating their captives with respect and kindness that contrasted sharply with the aggressive tactics of the police outside. Others, like Monica Gatambide, a hostage who was also the Mint's secretary, found themselves in impossible situations that would change their lives forever. Monica was pregnant and dealing with a complicated relationship with her boss, the Mint's director. Her situation became even more complex when Denver, one of the robbers, developed feelings for her and began protecting her from both external threats and internal conflicts. Inside the Mint, relationships formed that defied the circumstances. Denver fell in love with Monica, even though she was pregnant with another man's child. Their relationship developed from captor and hostage to something genuine and protective, showing how extreme circumstances can break down normal social barriers and reveal underlying human connections. Tokyo and Rio began a romance that would prove both passionate and destructive. Despite the age difference and the stress of their situation, they found in each other an emotional anchor that helped them cope with the intensity of the operation. Their relationship represented the human need for connection, even in the most dangerous circumstances. Even Berlin, despite his cold demeanour and calculating nature, showed unexpected depth in his interactions with hostage Ariadna Cascales, a young woman studying art who reminded him of his younger self. Their conversations revealed Berlin's intelligence and culture, but also his fundamental inability to see other people as anything more than objects for his own entertainment. But the real drama was happening in the psychological warfare between the professor and the authorities. Every move the police made had been anticipated. Every strategy they employed had a counter-strategy waiting. The professor was always exactly 3 steps ahead, manipulating media coverage, public opinion, and even individual police officers through his intricate understanding of human psychology. The professor's control room was a marvel of preparation and technology. Hidden in a location known only to him, it contained multiple monitors showing news coverage, police communications, and feeds from inside the Mint. From this nerve centre, he could coordinate every aspect of the operation while maintaining his cover as Salvar Martin, the mild-mannered antique dealer-dating police negotiator Raquel Murillo. The brilliance of the professor's plan wasn't just in its execution, it was in its message. While everyone assumed the robbers were stealing money from the Mint, they were actually printing new money using the Mint's own equipment and materials. Technically, they weren't stealing anything that existed before they arrived. The professor was making a pointed commentary about how money is created by governments and banks, questioning who really has the right to print currency. This philosophical dimension elevated the heist from simple crime to political statement. The professor was challenging the entire economic system, pointing out that money is essentially an agreement, a shared fiction that has value only because we collectively decide it does. By printing their own euros using official equipment, he was exposing the arbitrary nature of monetary authority. The media coverage became part of the professor's strategy. He understood that public opinion would be crucial to the success of his plan, so he orchestrated events inside the Mint to generate sympathy for the robbers and suspicion of the authorities. When police tactics seemed excessive, when hostages defended their captors, when the robbers' demands seemed reasonable, public opinion began shifting in unexpected directions. As the standoff continued, secrets began emerging that threatened to destroy everything. Raquel discovered that her supposedly dead brother had actually faked his death years earlier and was now working with the professor. The revelation that her own family had been manipulating her was devastating, especially as she was simultaneously falling deeper in love with the man orchestrating her professional humiliation. Her brother's involvement added another layer of betrayal to an already complex situation. He had allowed his family to believe he was dead, had watched his sister struggle with grief and guilt, all while working with the professor to plan the heist. This revelation forced Raquel to question everything she thought she knew about her family, her judgment, and her ability to trust her own instincts. Inside the Mint, tensions reached a breaking point when Berlin's authoritarian leadership style clashed with the team's growing emotional bonds with the hostages. His decision to potentially harm hostages to maintain control led to conflicts that nearly tore the team apart. Berlin's illness was progressing, making him more desperate and unpredictable, willing to take risks that threatened both the mission and the lives of everyone involved. The professor had predicted these internal struggles and had contingencies for them, but what he hadn't fully accounted for was the depth of genuine emotions that would develop. Tokyo's impulsiveness, Rio's youth and inexperience, Denver's protective instincts, and Berlin's egomaniacal tendencies all created variables that threatened the carefully orchestrated plan. Tokyo's relationship with Rio became particularly problematic when her protective instincts conflicted with operational security. Her willingness to take risks to protect him, and his willingness to make mistakes because of his feelings for her, created vulnerabilities that the professor struggled to manage from his remote location. Meanwhile, the police investigation led by Inspector Angel Rubio began uncovering clues about the professor's identity. Angel was methodical and detail-oriented, the kind of investigator who noticed small inconsistencies and followed them to their logical conclusions. His investigation into Raquel's new boyfriend, Salva Martin, was systematic and thorough, making him dangerous to the professor's plans. Angel's work revealed the elaborate preparation that had gone into the heist. He discovered that someone had been planning this operation for years, studying the Mint security systems, researching the backgrounds of potential team members, and even infiltrating various institutions to gather intelligence. The scope of the preparation was so extensive that it suggested resources and patience beyond typical criminal enterprises. The psychological pressure on everyone involved was immense. Raquel was torn between her duty as a police officer and her growing feelings for Salva. Every conversation with him was both personally fulfilling and professionally compromising. She was falling in love with someone who was using her emotions against her, yet her feelings were genuine, even if his initial motives were manipulative. The professor was maintaining multiple identities and manipulating everyone around him while trying to keep his emotions toward Raquel separate from his mission. But emotions don't follow operational plans, and his genuine feelings for her created complications he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing something that couldn't be controlled through careful planning and logical analysis. Inside the Mint, hostages and robbers were forming bonds that made the situation increasingly complex. Students who had been terrified during the initial assault began to see their captors as protectors rather than threats. Employees who had initially hoped for rescue began to worry about what would happen to the robbers who had treated them kindly. The Stockholm Syndrome that developed wasn't one-sided. The robbers also began to care about their hostages, creating emotional investments that complicated tactical decisions. When Berlin ordered actions that would put hostages at risk, other team members pushed back, putting loyalty to their temporary family above loyalty to their criminal leader. As the heist entered its final phases, everything came to a head simultaneously. The police discovered the professor's tunnel system, which had been the real escape route all along. Construction crews working under the cover of a fake city project had spent months digging an elaborate tunnel network that connected the Mint to a remote location outside the city. The tunnel system was an engineering marvel, complete with ventilation, lighting, and transportation systems. It represented months of preparation and significant financial investment, further evidence that this wasn't a typical criminal enterprise but something planned on an almost military scale. Angel's investigation finally connected Salva Martin to the professor, putting Raquel in an impossible position. She was forced to choose between her feelings for the man she loved and her duty as a police officer. The revelation came at the worst possible moment, just as the operation was reaching its climax, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death for dozens of people. Inside the Mint, Berlin made increasingly desperate decisions as his illness progressed and the pressure mounted. His physical deterioration was affecting his judgment, making him more willing to take extreme measures to ensure the success of the operation. His relationship with the other team members became increasingly strained as his behavior became more erratic and dangerous. The climax revealed the true genius of the professor's plan. While everyone focused on the Mint, the real prize had been achieved. Billions of euros had been printed and were being smuggled out through the elaborate tunnel system. The hostage situation had been an elaborate distraction, a piece of theatre designed to occupy the authorities while the actual objective was accomplished. The logistics of moving billions of euros worth of currency were staggering. The professor had organised a supply chain that included transportation, storage and distribution networks. The money was being moved and hidden even as the siege continued, making recovery nearly impossible even if the authorities figured out what was really happening. But the professor's greatest triumph was also his greatest vulnerability. His genuine feelings for Raquel created an emotional weakness that nearly destroyed everything. When she discovered his true identity, the betrayal was devastating for both of them. She had been used, manipulated, and deceived by the man she loved, while he had fallen in love with the enemy he was supposed to be manipulating. The moment of revelation between them was emotionally shattering. Years of planning, months of preparation, and days of execution all came down to a single conversation between two people who had genuinely fallen in love despite being on opposite sides of an elaborate criminal enterprise. Their relationship had become real, even though it began as manipulation. The escape from the Mint was both triumphant and tragic. Berlin, knowing he was dying and determined to give his team the best chance of escape, stayed behind to hold off the police in a suicide mission that was as beautiful as it was heartbreaking. His death marked the end of the heist, but also the beginning of something larger. Berlin's sacrifice wasn't just tactical, it was emotional and symbolic. He died protecting the family he had helped create, giving them the time they needed to escape safely. His final moments revealed the depth of his love for his brother and his teammates, emotions he had kept hidden beneath layers of cynicism and sophistication. The team's escape through the tunnels was chaotic and emotional. After days of intense pressure, they were finally free but also scattered and uncertain about their futures. The bonds they had formed during the heist would have to sustain them through the isolation of their new identities and hidden lives. As the dust settled, it became clear that the professor had achieved something unprecedented. Not only had they escaped with billions of euros, but they had also captured the public imagination. The robbers became folk heroes, symbols of resistance against an unjust system. Their red jumpsuits and Dali masks became symbols of rebellion worldwide. The cultural impact of the heist extended far beyond Spain. News coverage turned the robbers into international celebrities, their story inspiring books, documentaries, and countless imitators. The professor had succeeded in creating a narrative that resonated with people who felt powerless against large institutions and economic systems. But victory came at a cost. The team was scattered, living in hiding with new identities provided by the professor's extensive preparation. Relationships were strained or broken. Trust had been both the foundation of their success and the source of their deepest wounds. The family they had become during the heist was now divided by geography and the need for secrecy. Tokyo and Rio's relationship was complicated by the trauma they'd shared and the isolation of their new lives. Love that had sustained them during the crisis now had to survive the mundane challenges of building a life together while hiding from the world. Their youth and inexperience made this transition particularly difficult. Denver and Monica were trying to build a life together while hiding from their past. Their relationship had begun in the most extreme circumstances, and now they had to discover whether it could survive normal life. Monica was dealing with pregnancy and the challenge of starting over with someone she barely knew, despite the intensity of their shared experience. The professor was dealing with the emotional aftermath of his relationship with Raquel, while trying to coordinate the ongoing needs of his scattered team. Success hadn't brought the satisfaction he had expected. The completion of his plan left him facing questions about purpose and meaning that years of focused preparation hadn't prepared him to answer. Season 2 revealed that the story was far from over. The success of the first heist had created new problems and new vulnerabilities. The team's celebrity status made them targets for law enforcement agencies around the world. Their success had also made them valuable assets for other criminal organizations and government agencies with their own agendas. The professor and Raquel's relationship continued in a complex dance of love, betrayal, and redemption. She had to choose between her duty as a police officer and her feelings for the man who had deceived her so completely. Their relationship was further complicated by her daughter's safety and her own professional reputation. Raquel's decision to leave her job and join the professor was emotionally wrenching but inevitable. She could no longer function as a police officer, knowing what she knew about the heist and her own involvement. Her choice to trust the professor despite his deception represented a leap of faith that would define the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the authorities were determined to capture the remaining team members and recover the stolen money. The investigation had become international, involving multiple countries and law enforcement agencies. The professor's network was under constant pressure, requiring ever more elaborate measures to maintain security and support the hidden team members. Rio's capture by the police set in motion events that would force the professor to consider the unthinkable, another heist. The bonds formed during their time in the Mint had created a family, and family members don't abandon each other. The professor realized that his carefully planned ending was actually just the beginning of a larger story. Rio's capture was devastating for the team's morale and security. Under interrogation and torture, he revealed information that compromised safe houses and escape routes. His youth and emotional attachment to Tokyo made him particularly vulnerable to psychological pressure, creating a crisis that threatened everyone's freedom. The professor's decision to plan another heist was driven by loyalty rather than greed. His team had risked everything for his plan, and now he would risk everything for them. This second operation would be even more dangerous than the first, attempting to rescue Rio while simultaneously striking another blow against the system that had pursued them. The psychological dynamics that made the first heist so compelling continued to evolve. The professor's relationship with Raquel deepened as she grappled with the realization that everything she thought she knew about love, duty, and justice had been challenged. Her transition from law enforcement officer to criminal accomplice was gradual but irreversible. Meanwhile, the captured Rio faced interrogation and torture that tested not only his own endurance but the loyalty of his former teammates. His captivity became a mirror reflecting the bonds that held the group together and the prices they were willing to pay for each other's freedom. The planning for Rio's rescue revealed new dimensions of the Professor's capabilities and resources. His network extended far beyond what anyone had imagined, including contacts in government, military, and criminal organizations around the world. The scope of his preparation for contingencies like team member capture was almost unbelievable in its thoroughness. What made this story particularly compelling was how it explored the nature of justice, morality, and human connection. Were the robbers criminals or freedom fighters? Was the Professor a manipulative sociopath or a brilliant revolutionary? Was their relationship with the hostages genuine or just another form of manipulation? The answers weren't simple, and that's what made the story so powerful. Each character existed in moral grey areas, making decisions that were simultaneously understandable and questionable. The Professor's love for Raquel was genuine, but it was built on deception. Berlin's affection for his teammates was real, but so was his willingness to harm innocent people. The hostages' sympathy for their captors was authentic, but it was also the result of psychological manipulation. The robbers' treatment of their captives was genuinely kind, but it served strategic purposes as well as humanitarian ones. Every relationship in the story contained multiple layers of truth and deception, making simple moral judgments impossible. Throughout both seasons, the themes of family loyalty and redemption remained central. The robbers weren't just a criminal team, they became a chosen family, bound together by shared trauma and mutual dependence. Their relationships with each other and with some of the hostages revealed the human capacity for connection even in the most extreme circumstances. The concept of chosen family was particularly important for characters who had been abandoned or betrayed by their biological families. Tokyo had lost her parents young and lived as an outsider until finding acceptance with the team. Rio had been isolated by his technical skills and social awkwardness until discovering belonging with people who valued his contributions. The Professor's relationship with his brother Berlin added another layer of complexity to the family dynamics. Their brotherhood was based on shared trauma from their father's death, but their approaches to life and crime were fundamentally different. Berlin's death wasn't just the loss of a team member, it was the Professor losing the last connection to his past and the person who had shaped his view of the world. The relationship between Moscow and Denver represented traditional family bonds tested by extreme circumstances. Their participation in the heist forced them to confront their relationship as adults and equals rather than father and child. Moscow's protective instincts conflicted with his respect for Denver's autonomy, creating tensions that mirrored the larger conflicts within the team. As the story concluded its initial arc, it was clear that the heist had been about much more than money. It was about challenging systems of power, questioning authority, and exploring what happens when desperate people find each other and decide to fight back against a world that has failed them. The political dimensions of the story were complex and multi-layered. The Professor's critique of the economic system was sophisticated, going beyond simple anti-capitalism to examine the nature of value, authority, and social contracts. His methods were criminal, but his arguments about the arbitrary nature of monetary systems and the corruption of financial institutions resonated with audiences worldwide. The heist also served as a commentary on media manipulation and public opinion. The Professor understood that the story being told about their actions would be as important as the actions themselves. By controlling the narrative, presenting the robbers as sympathetic figures fighting against oppression, he turned criminals into folk heroes and police into oppressors. The international response to the heist revealed the global nature of economic and political systems. The Professor's actions in Spain had implications for financial markets, government policies, and public opinion around the world. The story became a symbol for various forms of resistance and rebellion, interpreted differently by different audiences but universally compelling. The Professor had succeeded in creating something unprecedented, a crime that was also a political statement, a heist that was also a love story, and a robbery that was also a revolution. Whether you saw them as heroes or villains depended entirely on your perspective, and that ambiguity was exactly what made their story so compelling. The moral complexity of the story reflected the complexity of the modern world, where traditional categories of right and wrong, legal and illegal, moral and immoral, often overlap and contradict each other. The characters were neither purely good nor purely evil, but rather human beings making difficult choices under extraordinary circumstances. In the end, the Royal Mint heist wasn't just about stealing money. It was about stealing the narrative, capturing imaginations and proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't violence or money, but the ability to make people believe in something larger than themselves. The professor understood that the real heist wasn't the billions they printed. It was stealing the hearts and minds of an entire nation, turning criminals into folk heroes and making the impossible seem inevitable. The red jumpsuits and Dali masks became more than costumes. They became symbols of resistance, creativity, and the power of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things when they worked together. The choice of Salvador Dali as their symbol was particularly appropriate, as Dali had been a master of making the surreal seem real, of challenging perceptions and forcing viewers to question their assumptions about reality. The heist's legacy extended far beyond the immediate participants. It inspired countless imitators and sparked conversations about economic justice, government accountability, and the nature of civil disobedience. The professor's methods were criminal, but his message resonated with people who felt powerless against large institutions and economic forces beyond their control. The personal costs of the operation were enormous for everyone involved. Lives were lost, relationships were destroyed, and careers were ended. The victory came at a price that raised the questions about whether any cause, however just, could justify such damage to innocent lives. Yet the story also celebrated human resilience, creativity, and the capacity for love and loyalty in the face of overwhelming odds. The bonds formed during the heist proved stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The characters discovered strength they didn't know they had, and found family among people they would never have met under normal circumstances. The professor's greatest achievement may have been creating a story that forced audiences to examine their own assumptions about justice, morality, and the systems that govern their lives. By making criminals sympathetic and authority figures questionable, he challenged viewers to think critically about the world around them. And that perhaps was the professor's greatest theft of all. He stole people's assumptions about what was possible and replaced them with something far more dangerous: hope. Hope that ordinary people could challenge seemingly invincible systems, that careful planning and determination could overcome overwhelming odds, and that sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is simply refusing to accept that things have to be the way they are. The story of the Royal Mint heist became a modern mythology, a tale of underdogs challenging the powerful and winning against impossible odds. Like all great myths, it contained elements of truth and fantasy, reality and wish fulfillment, making it both entertaining and meaningful for audiences around the world. The professor's plan succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, not just in its immediate objectives, but in its lasting impact on popular culture and political discourse. The red jumpsuits and Dali masks became symbols recognized worldwide, representing resistance to authority and the power of collective action. But perhaps the most important legacy of the heist was its demonstration that stories matter, that the way we understand and interpret events can be as powerful as the events themselves. The professor didn't just rob a mint, he robbed the establishment of its monopoly on the narrative, proving that with enough creativity, intelligence, and determination, anyone can change the story being told about the world. In the end, that may be the most subversive message of all, that reality is not fixed, that systems can be challenged, and that sometimes the most effective way to change the world is to change the way people think about it. The professor understood that the real power doesn't lie in money or weapons, but in the ability to capture imaginations and inspire people to believe that change is possible. The Royal Mint heist was many things: a crime, a love story, a political statement, and a work of art. But above all, it was a story about the power of human beings to come together, overcome their differences, and achieve something greater than any of them could have accomplished alone. And in a world that often seems divided and hopeless, that may be the most valuable thing they stole of all.